Well, good morning, everybody. It's early in the morning before prayers. I'm supposed to be in silence. Shh. And today we celebrate Saint Dominic Guzman, founder of the Dominicans. And Dominic was a canon of the cathedral in Osma, and he went with his bishop to combat the Albigenses, which were a neo-Gnostic group. They believed that matter was evil and spirit was good, but they practiced gospel poverty, and therefore they were winning the support of the popular people who didn't understand theological matters. So Dominic and his bishop went on the missions to persuade them, to preach, to try to bring them back. And during that, he decided that he would found a community of men and then a contemplative branch of women who would be cloistered, and lay people who would go out and to preach the gospel and to combat the Albigense heresy. And to do this, the Cistercians pitched in and gave him his first 5 brothers temporarily to go out and accomplish this mission. And it began to unfold, and soon the Cistercians went back to their monastery because Dominic attracted followers. He was very much similar to Francis. Dominic wanted to merge the Franciscans and the Dominicans. Francis said, no, we're 2 different charisms. In fact, we're preaching and trying to convince a group called the Waldenses, which weren't as extreme, but they were outside of the church, at least some of them at that point in time, and they were trying to bring them back. All of this to say that Francis and Dominic developed a friendship, and consequently the 2 communities are called cousin communities. And they've had their rivalries, but through it all, they remained cousins. Dominic, once he saw the chapter of Mats with the Franciscans, where 5,000 friars were in poverty, and lay people came and took care of their needs, he said, we want to practice poverty in that extreme as well. So Dominic became a big proponent of gospel poverty, and he and Francis are really cousins, brothers, if you will, in the church during the same period of time. So I love St. Dominic, and as a matter of fact, my Myers-Briggs at one point said I would be a great Dominican. But I love him. Dominic was always cheerful, always upbeat with his brothers, but at night he was deep in prayer and in penance. So I love St. Dominic bringing Jesus in the right way to the people who had drifted astray. So St. Dominic, pray for us. And remember, all things are possible with God. Well, good morning again. I'm back at the monastery up at the Common Center before morning prayer, and I wanted to do St. Dominic Part 2. And that is that Dominic, it is said that when he saw the Franciscans at their first chapter of Mats, some 5,000 men with no provision, poverty, and the townspeople took care of him, and he went, whoa. And he wanted to merge the Franciscans and the Dominicans, and Francis said, no, I don't want to do that. 2 different charisms. But Francis gave him his cord that he wore of rope. And it's said from the Franciscan tradition that Dominic often, or always even, wore that cord under his Dominican habit as a sign of his great love for St. Francis and for the Franciscan movement. Later, of course, we have the 2 great scholastic and mystical giants. With the Dominicans, it was St. Thomas Aquinas, who gave rise to the Thomism that was adopted more or less by the Latin or the Western Church, and St. Bonaventure, who was the mystical of the 2, but his writing career was cut short because he was made the general minister of the Franciscan community, and therefore he didn't have the time to sit and write, or he probably would have written something similar to the Summa, but he wrote extensively nonetheless. And there began to be a rivalry between the Franciscans and the Dominicans being Thomists, the Franciscans being following Bonaventure, a more mystical tradition. And that was kind of an unfortunate thing. But really, when you read the two, Aquinas with the Dominican tradition and Bonaventure with the Franciscan tradition, they're very similar, and they both speak wonderfully about contemplation and mysticism. The Eastern Church loved St. Bonaventure and almost came back into union with the Western Church through the ministry of St. Bonaventure, but Bonaventure died short of the ecumenical council where this was going to be considered. He had a heart attack and died. But if you read St. Thomas Aquinas, all of that is in him too. It's just written in a much more formalized manner, and it's kind of hard to wade through. So I would encourage you, follow St. Dominic and St. Francis and the histories of these two movements, because they both did wonderful things in the church. We can too. That's why we study the saints. Remember, all things are possible with God.